All right, welcome to the Expert Witness Podcast. I'm happy to introduce today's guest, Torrey Roberts. Torrey is the principal engineer and founder of Roberts Forensics. His primary focus is on crash reconstruction. And in his 15 years of experience, he's investigated and reconstructed over 400 crashes. Torrey, thanks for being here today. We're happy to have you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, so one of the first questions I always like to ask is, how did you get introduced to this type of work?
So I kind of have an interesting story. I've been doing in some form or another like forensic engineering, crash reconstruction since 2001. I went to university at Boise State, and I was a freshman, and I had just applied for an internship with a guy in Boise that did. He was a civil engineer and he did forensic engineering, but he was kind of doing like some civil structural stuff, and he would did crash reconstruction. And so for me, just looking for an internship, not at that time really understanding even what I was getting into, I applied and went and interviewed, and I think it went pretty well. And then I didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks. And at the time I've always been kind of a car guy, into cars and stuff. So I got what I thought was a great job. I was working at one of the exotic car dealers in town, and kind of just what they called like a lot boy, where they'd sell a car, you'd go wash it, you'd clean, keep the lot organized. You just kind of the runaround guy, keeping track of all the keys for everything. And I was taking one of their cars to an upholstery shop to have some upholstery done, and this was like a fairly nice older vintage car, and I crashed it. Got in a crash while driving it, and so it basically spurred me like, hey, I'm probably not going to be working there anymore. I need to go find something else. And 20-year-old self is like, I got to call everybody I interviewed with, and so I just kept pestering him because that was the one that I felt the best about, and then ended up getting hired because I wouldn't leave him alone. So I got into crash reconstruction by actually getting into a crash.
All right.
Yeah, that's kind of the story. And I worked for him for, like 5 years all through school. Great, like part-time job. I learned a ton of stuff. I decided I wanted to go try out design, and I'd been I got my mechanical degree, but I'd been exposed to the civil work, and I took a job actually doing structural engineering as an EIT.
Okay.
And did that for like a couple of years. Went back into forensics again, working with him, and it just it didn't end up working out ultimately, but I still wanted to do it. But I wanted to really kind of hone in on the crash reconstruction stuff. So I just ended up, and I was even willing to relocate out of Boise because, as Boise's not a big town. Not always a high volume of work, and you really have to get your name out there on a national level to stay busy here. So I took a job in St. Louis working for a bigger forensic engineering firm, doing crash reconstruction. And then I worked for them for about 7 years before I relocated back to Boise, and started my own. So that's kind of my background.
No, that's cool. Got into it even while you were in school. I find most people have no idea what it even is while they're in school. It's not usually something they talk about much. So
yeah, it was a great experience because at a young age, he was a testifying expert. I just got a lot of really good just observational work. I got to help him, prep for depositions, help him out with all kinds of stuff. And actually, I even got to go see him testify a few times. So I felt like I really had my head wrapped around the industry, and how everything works early on. So
yeah, that's great. It's good to have someone like that that'll introduce you to it and bring you along.
Really fortunate.
Yeah. So when you came back to Boise and started your own company, were there any barriers or obstacles you had to overcome when you were starting this business? And did the cases come slowly, or have you been in high demand from day one?
I mean, I mean, the barriers and obstacles are just making the investment in yourself to do it. For me, I mean, it was kind of taking a gulp and buying all the equipment and the software and just betting that, hey, I think I have a really good reputation in the industry. I think I've been very credible. I know there's clients that will want to use me, and just the work sort of slowly came in. You know, that first year was mediocre, but then it's been a pretty good growth line since then. And I haven't done a ton of marketing. I'd say my marketing is just sort of tied up in the casework that I do, and that is doing a great job. And then trying to go get like the FaceTime with the client instead of a phone call. If they're around, you go to their office. You know, that, especially that's been good for local work. So yeah,
that's a great idea.
It was a bit of a slow burn, but then, as you know, once the faucet's on, you know, it's coming in. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So for the people that aren't familiar with accident reconstruction or crash reconstruction, can you tell us a little bit about the types of cases that you commonly work on? You know, what does that look like? What type of work are you doing, and what situations call for your expertise?
Yeah, so we're typically involved in cases where there's a lot of our cases, there's been a fatality, that kind of thing. So they're usually pretty bad crashes, pretty big accidents. We will get retained sometimes in the days after or the day of, and have to go to industry term as rapid, you know, response on it and get out to the scene right away is basically what they're looking for, because they want that like early collection of evidence. And then sometimes you're retained years later, and nobody anticipated it would be a big, you know, case that gets wrapped up in the legal system, and now they need an expert, and they've got 30 to 60 days to disclosure, whatever, and you've got what you have to work with. So it kind of runs that way. We do quite a bit of, I'm kind of specialized more in accidents involving heavy trucks, tractor trailers, that kind of thing, as well as motorcycles. So that's probably most of the cases that I get. Like, I still do some vehicle to vehicle work and some pedestrian accidents, but mostly tractor trailers.
Okay. So this is, I don't know if you heard about this. This was, it's probably 5 or 10 years ago. I was on my way to Idaho from Utah, and we were driving up I-15, and we were noticing that the other side of the freeway going southbound was just stopped for 4 or 5 miles. Like, there were people barbecuing, throwing football. Like, it was not moving slowly, it was dead stopped. And so my wife and I were curious, so we're looking it up. My wife was looking it up on her phone as I was driving, and apparently a trailer that had a bunch of cows in it came off this overpass, or came off the freeway exit and turned left to go back over the freeway, and was going too fast and tipped over.
Oh no.
And several cows fell out onto the freeway below, onto a couple of cars. And so they had to like stop everything and like rent a backhoe and bring it out. Yeah, cows didn't get up after the fall.
They weren't self-sufficient at that point.
Yeah. I mean, is that like the type of case that you would work on, something like that, or most?
Yeah, that definitely could be something crazy like that. I mean, it's stuff that you're just, sometimes you look at it and you're like, how did this even happen? Or I wouldn't imagine this would be the case. Like, it's, in one sense you're like, oh, I've done this type of case before, and in another sense they always have some nuance to them that just sort of surprises you. It's always something unique, you know.
Yeah, there is a large element of that in this type of work.
Yeah, it's so true. So true.
All right. So I guess next question, with doing accident reconstruction, you said that a lot of these cases you're almost on call. They'll call you right away. So are most of your
Yeah.
cases local, regional, or do you work nationwide, or how does that work for you?
I mean, probably 50% or more at this point are local to Idaho. I would say Idaho, kind of Montana, Utah, Eastern Oregon, Washington, kind of that region.
Hmm.
Um, I still get called on cases to go, you know, kind of all over the West. So New Mexico's always popular. And then I'll do some work in the Midwest. Got a couple of clients that will basically send me all over the place. And so it's still a bit of a mix, but I really like growing the business as close to my office as I can at this point for my work.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
as the business grows and you add more people, it's like, yeah, you got to spread out more and do more in different areas, and that's completely okay too. But the older I get, the more I want to be within like a 4 hour drive. Get up early, go out, and maybe get back the same night. So
Yeah, no, I get
yeah,
that. I get
yeah,
that.
yeah.
All right. So what is it about expert witness work that you really enjoy? Like why do you do this type of work?
I think like my favorite part of it is just getting like a deep dive into figuring it out, into
Hmm.
that challenge. Just when you can have those days where you're just like, I'm just going to dive into this case and figure out this case, figure out what happened. And this is after you've gone out and done all the legwork, all the data collection, you have everything back, and now you're like analyzing the case. Those are my favorite days. Is because I almost just get lost in it. I'll start it in early in the morning. I'll be like, it's 7 o'clock at night, and I got to wrap this up. But I'm still so obsessed with what's going on and really just checking off every single variable that you can, and that kind of stuff I feel like is just one of those things that I don't know as an adult that there's too many things that you get to just kind of just lose your day in, and that's really my favorite part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. When you get
Yeah,
into that flow state, there's a book, I was reading a book on flow the other day,
yeah,
and they talk about that when you're just in the zone and you're working on something that you like and you're competent in and
yeah,
working on solving the problem. It really is enjoyable. I agree with that.
yeah. And it's very rewarding when you get through it and you look at it and you say, on the onset, and this is how I try to do on every case, I want to go in as a blank slate.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't know what happened. I didn't know any of this. Started piecing evidence together, started running your calculations, maybe doing some simulation stuff like that. And when you look at it, you figure out, and you have that like, I feel very, very sure that this is how this happened because I've checked every other possibility. I've looked at everything that I can, and I feel like I have sufficient evidence to come to that conclusion. And it's kind of it's science, but it's kind of has that feeling of creation to it almost, where you
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
get some value.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I agree with
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Oh, that's great. All right. So have you ever been reviewing information for a case and found out that you're definitely on the wrong side of the case? And if you have, what do you do in those situations?
I mean, I hope that's happening, because if you don't find out you're on the wrong side, you're not looking at all possibilities, because there's always going to be cases that come in that you're going to be on the wrong side. And I
Hmm.
always kind of look at it like, my analogy is it's as an expert, it's my job to give the weather forecast, and it's my client's job to decide how they want to dress, you know, and
Yeah.
that's how I look at it. And so there's going to be cases where you come back and say, hey, there's a lot of bad news here, and you need to know about it up front
Yeah.
before we keep going. And I feel like that long term just credibility in this industry is such a big deal, and
Hmm.
I think you're going to just have a really good reputation, and I know most clients really appreciate knowing up front what the issues are and what they aren't, so that they can decide how they want to dress, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
I've had the same experiences. I find most attorneys,
yeah,
they're disappointed to get that sort of news that, they don't really have a case, but they're very happy to get it. They'd rather get it
yeah,
early on before they've spent a whole bunch of time and money.
Yeah.
And that allows them to make the best decisions for their client. Which,
Yeah. And I think with that, it comes with, being very thorough. And when you're expressing those things to them that aren't good news, you really have a good outlay of here's what it is, here's why, here's everything I've done, everything I've looked at. I've looked at this from all angles, and
yep.
and then they really trust and respect your work, and they're going to come to you again. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Very good. All right. So this is always a fun question. So depositions and trials are often thought of as serious and well planned out events. And sometimes they are, but not always. So if you ever had a particularly lighthearted or funny interaction that happened during a trial or a deposition?
Yeah, I do. I have a pretty good one that I'll always remember. It was in Springfield, Illinois, and it was such an interesting thing because sometimes just statute limitations, like that there were some younger individuals involved in this particular accident, so it ran pretty long. And I was in St. Louis for about 6 years, and then I was actually in Denver for a year and a half or so. But this was one of the first cases that I got in St. Louis, and I'd worked it up, and then this thing just sat forever. Literally, the month I'm moving is the trial for this particular case. So it's like, I think it was like the second case I ever got, and one of the last things I did before I moved was go testify in this trial. My house was literally in boxes, And so we go testify, and I really enjoyed working with this particular client. They just like, we kind of had a good rapport with each other and stuff. And we'd had a couple other testifying cases. And so he comes out of the courtroom to get me to testify. And there's like a 3-year-old kid sitting by the door. And he just flings that door open and just sends that kid flying. Just hits him really hard.
Oh,
And so I'm coming in to sit down, getting sworn in, and you just hear in the background just this wailing. So that's always just a funny what a way to start off your testimony.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. And then I have another one that was in deposition, actually. And depos are always kind of tense and stuff. And I had I just come and say it. I basically, like, the week before, like 4 days, I had the weekend, I had a vasectomy, and I couldn't sit because I just was in pain. And so I tried sat down for the first like 30 minutes, and I couldn't. So I stood up and I started answering the questions that way. And the depo went from like fairly friendly to very combative very quickly, because they're like, why is this guy standing up? So finally we take a break, and I explain the whole situation to him, and he's like, oh, no problem, man. I just had that myself a while ago. So yeah, those are the two that kind of stick out. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, fun stuff. All right,
Yeah.
so if you were going to give someone who had just been retained on their first case one piece of advice, what would it be?
I mean, I would say the best thing that you can do is, number one, make sure you're knowledgeable on the subject and ready to take in the case. Don't take in something that you just don't have the expertise to be doing, or at least some comfort level that you feel qualified to be an expert. But beyond that, just come in as a blank slate as far as opinions on what happened. You're going to hear from your client. You might read a police report. You might have all these initial thoughts on it, but really try to brush those aside until you get to look at the evidence yourself, and you get to like really piece this together, because so many times things aren't always what they seem on the onset. And if people have just given this case or whatever a glance and a look at it and make these assumptions or correlations that just don't exist, you can find yourself going down a path that just isn't going to end up being correct, or wasting a lot of time on things that aren't real.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, So one of the things that I found, like you said, is that in almost every case, everybody wants to know what happened, right? Like
Yeah.
why did this person get hurt, or why did this car crash, or why did this thing break? You know, what really happened? Have you ever had one where you just can't figure it out, or
Yeah. And
where everybody, the police report, everyone had this idea of what happened, but turned out to be something totally different?
yeah,
Ever had those
I mean
experiences?
there's always your obscure cases where people look at it, make assumptions, and have this conclusion. And if you're looking at something and you just keep telling yourself it doesn't make sense, it's not adding up, it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when you have to just wipe the slate clean and reset and try to come back to it. I mean, I've been working on one throughout this week that nothing added up coming into it until I did like a total reset on it and started over. And then I did come up with a solution that matches all the evidence and everything aligns, but it wasn't at all the obvious situation, and I'm sure you've had those cases where you are just kind of banging your head against your desk, and it's usually because you have some assumption or something in your head that's like, oh, it's like this one I looked at here before, except then you look at it, you're like, well, this piece isn't adding up, and this piece isn't adding up, and this piece isn't adding up.
Yeah,
You gotta start
absolutely.
over. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one case I did. I was working. This was when I was fairly new, and I was actually working for the expert, right? So I was kind of the lead associate, if you will. And he'd gone out and done the inspection, and they all had this idea of they were trying to put a scissor lift up on a trailer, and it had fallen off and hit somebody. And there was a bolt that was bent in just a really weird way. And I'd gone through and I'd written the report up kind of the way that he had thought that it might have happened, and it just didn't add up. And so we went back and tried to figure out, okay, and turns out that one of the ramps wasn't even bolted on, and one of the ramps had actually fallen off, and they thought that the twisted bolt had been like twisted out as it fell. It turns out the twisted bolt was in the ramp that stayed on. And we were able to recreate that and show the bending pattern, and it turned out really good. But man, I had the same experience, like had almost a whole report written, and I'm just like, this just doesn't add up, man.
And it's even harder too, I think, when you have multiple experts on a project and the momentum's pushing in this direction, and you're the guy that's like, well, wait a minute, this is not adding up. This doesn't make sense. Here's why. I think we need to look at this again. And find it out. And then the other thing too is, like, as mechanical engineers, the stuff that we look at, so it can be dynamic. Right. And I think pulling yourself back, and I see this in car crashes all the time, where it's like you have your hand calc, you look at the evidence, you look at everything, but sometimes there's things that just like, this just doesn't add up. And until you actually go in and take the steps to maybe simulate it or really understand the dynamics of how those vehicles are moving, it just won't make sense, and you're going to miss something every single time. Like whether I end up using a simulator for everything or not, I always usually do something with it because it just helps you understand some of those dynamics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I like that. If it's not making sense, wipe the slate clean. That's good. Good advice. All right. So what do you find makes a good expert witness, or helps the expert be persuasive?
I think that for the persuasive part, I think the first thing there is your credibility is coming in, and you have a mark against you usually coming into our system because you are retained by a side and you are compensated by a side. So you really got to go through and show that you've considered all the possibilities, you've looked at everything, and really consider the evidence. And then beyond that, I think you have to be an effective communicator. You have to realize that when you're testifying, the audience may not be 12 engineers. It's never going to be 12 engineers. You got to talk to everybody about it. And that can be a real challenge. That part is tough. And then sometimes your window to actually testify where you have their attention is fairly short. And I always try to set things up to where it's more of a teaching opportunity as well as testifying, to where as I'm testifying, I'm also trying to explain these concepts to people in simplified ways so they understand them. And, I feel like if you can get people to conceptually understand what you're talking about, you have a lot better results than if you're just up there spewing, giving your sermon, so to speak.
Yeah.
It definitely helps a lot. And I will say myself, like, that's the hardest thing about this job. For me, it's just that effective communication. And it's the one thing that with time, I feel like that's what continues to improve about how I approach this, how I do it, the way I write reports, all of that. It's just gotten better over time because it's the one thing that I think can always get better,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And do you ever practice your communication? Like, I know sometimes I'll come home and try and explain something to my wife and just like watch her eyes glaze over. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about, David.
Well, and I'll say that when the people I'm going to talk about, I'll be like, hey, I need you to be a jury for me for a second. And explain what I'm looking at, what I'm thinking and stuff like that. And I just give them zero background on it and start to explain it because I just want to get their initial reaction to what I'm saying and see if they understand it and see what they think. And it's 50-50, man. Sometimes you nail it. Sometimes, you just get that blank look like you didn't even start that the right way. You just failed from the beginning. And then you go back and be like, okay, how can I explain this better?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important. And, for engineers, I think a lot of people go into engineering because they don't like English, they don't like speaking, they don't like writing. And I don't know how it is for you, but at least for me, that's 90% of what I'm doing most of the time. It's all writing about engineering, but it's all, there's a lot of writing and a lot of speaking and a lot of explaining.
Well, and like you ever sit on your report and you just go, how do I say this? What's the best way? And you try to write a paragraph and look at it, and then you're like, okay, rephrase it this way, or what order, because there's so many nuances in all these cases and so much evidence, and you could present it a specific way, and just trying to figure out like what's the best way to present all this so that my client understands, not just my client, but the jury, anybody reading the report really has a good understanding of it. And that's hard. That's hard because you have to almost pull yourself out of being an engineer for a minute.
Absolutely. There's some reports that I've rearranged 5 or 6 times trying to make it flow, and I was like, oh, can't talk about this yet because I haven't talked about this other piece that needs to come first. And some of it's a little circular sometimes, so you gotta make sure it's organized really well. It's almost like putting together a sales presentation in some respect, that you have to build the base at the bottom and then add the details in as you go. So
you got to start from the foundation.
Absolutely.
Right.
All right. So we find that most experts would like to be involved in more cases. What have you found to be the most effective marketing technique or the best way to get new cases in your business?
I mean, I think first and foremost is just your reputation. Just like the work that you do, how you handle your cases, how you communicate with your clients. I mean, I've always found that like good communication is just so crucial in this, and keeping them up to date and letting them know what you're finding, where you're at. And the problem is that, as we both know, when you get really busy, that can become really challenging when you're managing a whole lot of cases. And I do think the group of clients that we deal with, they do talk to each other a lot, and so I get calls, most new clients call and say, hey, I was referred to you by X and so and so, and that's how a lot of new work comes in for me. And then just with those existing clients, I'm a big believer in, go hand deliver your report. If you can have any FaceTime, if you have to have a call, go meet with them, go to their office, spend time with them. I feel like the more FaceTime you get, the more they get to know you and understand you, the better. And I've always had good success with that. And you all the marketing, your website, your LinkedIn, all that stuff, but none of that even compares to just doing great work and communicating and getting that face time when you get a chance.
Yeah, it's all about being memorable and being known and actually having those real relationships, right?
Yeah.
As convenient as Zoom meetings are, you don't
Yeah.
quite get the same feeling after, sitting in a room with
No, no, you don't. I think it's something to be said for person to person, especially now where Zoom's so common,
someone.
yeah, big deal.
All right. So in your business, do you do any engineering work outside of the forensic work, or are you focused solely on the forensic expert
I
witness?
mean, we're primarily doing forensic work. We don't have like any design that we do or anything like that. And if we do any type of design, it's usually geared towards testing something or something to do with a forensic case, So
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, we're pretty much centered on that. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess how has that, I mean, you said that you did some design work early on in your career. How has shifting into the expert work, how's that affected your life and your business?
Oh, I think I actually really enjoyed doing design work when I did it. But I also felt that it was very repetitive for what I was doing. And I think for me, the one thing that the expert work does is I feel like you're always learning and growing. You could 24 hours a day, the rest of your life on something with expert work and still continue to learn. There's just so much out there with it to know and to understand. And it just, with the crash reconstruction, especially with how much vehicles are changing with all the electronics, there's just always something new to learn. And I kind of felt like, at least in the area design I was in, I might have just sort of flatlined, I don't know. Not to say there's always more you can learn, but it definitely wasn't near as broad and dynamic as the expert work can be. And then that and becoming a better communicator, which I think just transfers into your entire life. That's not just expert work, that's your relationships, that's everything that you do is be an effective communicator. So,
Very good. So this has been great. I love talking with you. We've met before and had lunch, and
yeah,
always good to chat with you. So the last question is, how can attorneys find you? If they're listening to this and want to hire you on a case, how can they find you?
Yeah, so everything's on my website. So it's robertsforensic.com. And then I've also got a LinkedIn page for myself and my business, and all the contact info and everything that they need is right there. So that's the easiest way. It's probably the most common too.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you so much, Torrey, for being here. We appreciate your thoughts and your comments, and wish you all the best of luck in your business.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you having me. Enjoyed talking to you.